think this is working fine. Perfect. Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new scientific moment. I'm Julian Len. I hope you can hear me well. I'm a researcher and dev in the research and innovation team at Rootstock. These talks are technical talks about topics we work on, such as blockchain, cryptography, security, and so on. We're accepting new speakers, so if you want to present, don't hesitate to reach us out through the Open Slack channel or the Research and Innovation Forum, which we are sharing the link on the chat. Today is presenting Sergio Lerner, co-founder of Rootstock. He's a computer security and cryptocurrency researcher. He joined the Bitcoin community and collaborated to strengthen the security of the Bitcoin core, and also proposed more than 70 design improvements to Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Rootstock. This talk, he will cover the classification and security of blockchain breaches from the theoretical and practical points of view. He will discuss how these breaches enable interoperability and provide an overview of existing breach types. Welcome, Sergio.
Julian, for having me. I remember that I founded the scientific moment like 5 years ago, so it's very nice to see that this this tradition keeps on going over the years.
Glad
Okay,
to have you
so
here.
should I present
Good
now?
luck.
Thanks. Share screen. 1 minute. Okay, so I should present here. Okay, so let's start it. Let's get started. Sorry. So this talk is about blockchain breach security, and it will be long, but I hope that it will be interesting because we are going to be talking about a lot of topics related to breach security. So first, we will give an introduction of what is a cross-chain communication and what are breaches. And we'll talk about something that's very few times it's mentioned. It is Samyatin impossibility theorem, the impossibility result. That's very strong and very important in the development of breaches, and how
Sorry, I was muted. I think we are having some connection issues. Let's wait a few minutes so Sergio can join.
hello. Are we online, back online?
Yes, great. Let's start
Okay.
over again.
Yeah, my internet connection went down. Sometimes it happens. So I'm going to start over because so that we can have a clean talk. Okay, I'm very very sorry. Uh, so let's get started again. Share screen. Okay, so I'm going to start over so that we have the whole video. So this talk it's about the security of blockchain bridges, and we will talk about cross-chain communication and an important result of Samyatin in a paper which states that there are limits on the security that we can get with the bridges. Then we will show the security incident that happened in the last 2 years and how can we evaluate the security of the bridges. We will explore all types of the existing breaches so that you can analyze them and find which one is the one um, you are going to use. And particularly, we will focus on consensus breaches, which I think are the most secure type of bridges. And finally, if we have time, we will talk about Rootstock and the Popek bridge. So first, cross-chain communication. A cross-chain communication protocol is a protocol that allows you to send messages from one blockchain to another in a secure way. And by secure, we mean that these messages cannot be delayed forever. And obviously, they cannot be tampered with, right? They have to arrive intact. A blockchain bridge is a particular type of cross-chain communication protocol that uses this messaging system to send messages to allow to lock bitcoins or lock a certain token in a blockchain and create a proxy asset on a different blockchain. And there is a impossibility result, which is very strong, that is in Samyatin paper, Communication Across Distributed Ledgers. And he proved that it's impossible to do cross-chain communication without either a trusted third party or a synchrony assumption. So by trusted third party, we mean that there's a certain groups that has eventually the power to steal the funds in the peg. And a synchrony assumption is an assumption that messages from one blockchain will eventually arrive to the second blockchain on certain time bounds, right? So this is a very strong result, and it puts us. This is kind of a rocky start, right? Because we start with a problem. So how can we do to overcome this problem? So we have to make some additional assumptions. For instance, we can assume have the assumption that all these participants are rational, and they will not steal the funds in the peg, not because they can, but because they don't want to. Because if they do, they will be penalized somehow. This is very difficult to get to build a bridge using this incentive compatibility way, and we will talk more about this later. We can also say that this trusted third party will be represented by a honest majority of a number of third parties. And so instead of having a single third party, we have now multiple third parties. So we have reduced the risks. And maybe what we can do better is to reduce an already third party that we already trust. For instance, the block producers, right? So let's say we don't want to bring a new set of notaries or reliers that we have to trust. And so maybe we can build a protocol so that we only have to trust the block producers. But there is a catch with this, is that the risk of producing blocks and the risk of holding custody of the funds in the peg are very, very different. So let's say, for example, the Bitcoin miners. The Bitcoin miners, they can reorganize the blockchain if they collude, and they can probably double spend, but they cannot steal arbitrary people's funds, right? Uh, So now if we give the miners the power to also be able to steal the funds in the peg, maybe they turn malicious when they were honest, just because the temptation was not as strong. And other assumption that we can make that is related to the trust assumption in the block producers is that there will be no transaction censorship, and there will be no reorganizations of the blockchains by the block producer. So if we can have any of these assumptions, and then maybe we can build a bridge that is secure. So let me give you an example of this impossibility result. So let's assume that we have a magic bridge that allows you to send information or move digital assets between two blockchains, that these two blockchains have smart contracts. And clearly, um, the destination chain must understand the consensus of the first chain to be able to, detect the events that have happened in the first chain. But the block producers of the first chain can produce several forks of the chain and present several of these states to the second smart contract. So they could create one fork where certain event happens, but in real life, in the honest blockchain, that event never happened. So clearly this second blockchain must be able to decide which of these two forks, which of the two views of the source blockchain is the good one, right? And obviously it cannot do that because these two forks are equally valid forks. Even if what could happen is, even if the two of them could, if you could have a way to differentiate between these two, let's say that the longest chain wins, still if one of these two view is censored by the block producers of the second blockchain, then again you have the same problem. So this is the essence of the impossibility result. And this is what the blockstream researchers found out after they published the original paper about two-way pegs, which was called Enabling Blockchain Innovations with Peg Sidechains. And this paper is from 2014. So it was the first paper to propose the idea of consensus bridges, which are bridges that they run a light client of the other blockchain so they can essentially understand the consensus of the other blockchain. So they created a paper, they published the paper, and I think that some point later they realized that they were giving miners much higher powers and they were putting a lot more trust on miners, and they decided not to continue with this line of research, and they never really implemented this for Bitcoin. So now that we have an idea of how what is a bridge, I will show you how difficult it is to build bridges in practice. So this is a Vitalik's prophetic tweet from January 2022. And I'm going to read it. My argument for why the future will be multi-chain but not be cross-chain: there are fundamental limits on the security of bridges that hop multiple zones of sovereignty. And by fundamental limits, he was referring to Samyatin theorem, right? So if you are inside a single chain and you can have this synchrony assumption, then basically you can build secure bridges, or the most secure bridges. And what happened in 2022 actually was very close to what Vitalik predicted. So we have Axie Infinity running bridge that suffers 625 million exploit. Then we have the Harmony Horizon bridge, 100 million exploit, 10%, of the value of the token, I think, was affected. The Wormhole bridge, okay, about 300 million stolen. And then we have the Nomad bridge that was drained for 200 million. Okay, so these are all things that happened in 2022. And then we had some vulnerabilities that were were not exploited because they were found by the researchers before. So Polygon, for instance, they had a bug that could have allowed an attacker to steal 850 million, and they could found the bug before and upgraded contracts and avoid this. And the same happened with Cosmos, and the whole 8 billion ecosystem was in danger because there was a critical vulnerability in the breach, and they found it before it was exploited. And if we go back at 21, sorry, then there were 3 additional hacks of breaches: the Poly Network, ChainSwap, and ThorChain that happened in 2021. So this seems to be a recurring event. I hope that in 2023 it doesn't happen, but look at what happened in 2022. So what are the most common vulnerabilities in breaches? I think that we can narrow this to only 2 of them. First, bugs in smart contracts. So this is the main cause of vulnerabilities, like something related to how software is designed, the quality of software. And the second, it's probably more related to standard cybersecurity, like it's when the majority of validators get compromised, get hacked. And it doesn't matter, this can happen to functionaries, signatures, relayers, notaries, peg notaries. So it's always the same. Like they are running nodes in personal computers, in laptops, and not in sandboxed or isolated environments. And this is probably related to the fact that this nascent crypto ecosystem, it's not using the standard, the best practices that maybe the banking industry or some other industries have already mastered. So maybe you can think of this question: so how many signatories is really necessary to the bridge to be secure? Okay, so there must be a number, right? But in practice, probably the number of signatories is the less important thing. There are some other things that are so much more important than the number of signatories. Okay, so if we focus on the signatories, of course, we have the Nakamoto coefficient. Like, how many of them are really independent? So how many we have to hack to get access to all of them? Obviously, the cybersecurity and physical security of the signatories is important. But letting that aside, we have anything that relates to how the bridge was created. What's the design? Does it have a formal test, a formal proof that the security it's sound? Did it had security audits of that design and the code? And there are a lot of other things that relate to operation, like does the development team use a secure development cycle? Like, what is the quality of the development of the code? And this is, I think, this is the most important reason. Like, people make bugs. I mean, people commit mistakes, and there should be peer reviews. There should be quality assurance. There should be a lot of stages to detect bugs before they get to production, right? And also, there's a lot of things that you can do to uh, uh, react when you detect something abnormal on a breach that very few protocols do. Like, you can have circuit breakers, rate limiters, escape hatches, time locks, upgrade delays, cross checks of the same properties in 2 different places, security layers that also protect you from failure of one of the layers. And this is a very few times seen in bridges. And this is very important to make time work in favor of the ones that defend the breach and not help the ones that attack the breach. Like, if you think about physical security in a bank, you always have delays that allows you to catch the attacker afterwards he tried to attack. And if you have a breach that you are able to steal hundreds of millions of dollars in a few milliseconds, then you are not able to do anything. So in slow breaches are generally much better than fast breaches in this regard. And obviously you should have bug bounties for researchers to report honestly the vulnerabilities. You should take care of the front end web security, because many users just connect to a certain front end and they do not really verify much. So it's very important, the front end security. And also, it's very important to have full transparency and auditability of all the peg-ins and peg-outs in the breach. For instance, recently there was an article talking about the obscurity of the Binance chain breach. Like no one was checking that the balances of locked assets and issued assets did actually match, right? So transparency and auditability is very important. So now let's talk about all the kinds of breaches that are there. Okay, we are good with time. Yeah. So first, I will talk about breach families, and because the term breach is used for so many things that I want to first split in these families. So first, we have the two-way pegs. So the two-way pegs is the most important breach, where basically you lock an asset X in one blockchain, and then you receive a newly created asset. It's not the same asset, it's a different asset, let's call PX or proxy X, sometime later in a secondary blockchain. Then you have swaps, where there's no movement of assets between chains, but essentially Alice and Bob exchanges X for PX. So Alice has X and wants PX, Bob has PX and wants X, and so the transfers happen each one in each chain, but there is no cross transfer actually. The problem with swaps is they generally need some liquidity provider to act as Bob, because you don't always find a counterparty that is willing to do the opposite trade as the one you want to do. And the third type, I think it's the most interesting, is called repayment protocols. In this case, Alice locks X in the first blockchain with the expectation of later having PX, but instead of sending through the breach to herself, she sends this asset X to Bob. Okay, so Bob will receive PX sometime later on the secondary blockchain, but for Alice to have instant access to PX, Bob will advance PX to Alice in the secondary blockchain. So seen as by Alice, this happens very fast. But from the perspective of Bob, the funds he receives sometime later. So probably Bob will charge Alice a certain fee so that Alice have access to these funds very fast. But it's very interesting because you can do this atomically and in a decentralized ways. Of course, you need some liquidity providers as Bob to be able to advance PX to Alice almost immediately. So if we could put in diagram the three families, we have obviously the two-way peg, which is necessary for the rest to exist. You have swaps that use the assets that are already created on both chains, and you need to have the liquidity on both chains. And you have the repayment protocols, which is kind of a mixture of a swap in one chain and the use of two-way peg in the other chains. It's kind of a mixture of a swap and a two-way peg. But now we will focus on two-way pegs, because this is what this talk is about, the two-way peg types of bridges. So to have secure, what does it mean that two-way peg is secure? Basically, we need security during transfer, which means that the lock and mint of these tokens and the proxy tokens happen in an atomic way. So there is no way of keeping the tokens in the main chain unlocked and at the same time minting tokens in the secondary chain. Obviously, if there is a blockchain reorganization, this might happen, but from the protocol perspective, it needs to assure that this does not happen, assuming that the blockchains do not reorganize. And afterwards, once you perform the mint, you need to assure that the funds in custody, the funds that are locked, are kept secure for as long as it's needed, right? So this is a permanent requirement of security from the parties that are taking part of the custody of these funds. So let's see how this happens very quickly. So we have two blockchains, blockchain A and blockchain B. So if we want to send assets from A to B, you send these, let's say these are Bitcoins, you send Bitcoins to the chain, to someone. Then there is some message that is transmitted from one blockchain to another, from certain actor. And then, some tokens are issued in the blockchain B and are sent to the same party or a different party. The opposite is that these tokens, or wrap tokens, sometimes called, are burned in the blockchain B, and this emits a signal, an event that is also transmitted to the blockchain A, and in blockchain A, these assets that were locked are unlocked and given to the user, the recipient. Okay, so it's kind of very simple. So what do we want from an ideal two-way peg? We want it to be secure. We want it to be simple. Like complexity is the opposite. I mean, it generally leads to insecure systems. So we want it to be simple. We want to be trustless, open, decentralized, censorship resistant, capital efficient. This is very important. We want it to be fast and autonomous. And really, you cannot have all of this. You have obviously some impossibility result regarding decentralization, but generally some of these requirements are kind of in contradiction. So we will have to be pragmatic. We will have to choose trade-offs between different things, right? So the most simple breach is obviously having a single party having the authority to receive these tokens and create the wrap tokens in the secondary chain. So obviously the downside is that the security depends on a single party. It is fully centralized, fully single point of failure. But if you think about it, it's not so bad for certain types of digital asset. Let's talk about Tether dollars, or let's talk about the USDC, the Circle dollars, right? So these companies are issuing these tokens, so you're already trusting them. So maybe you can keep trusting them and let them run the breach. And this has a lot of benefits, like well, it may be slow, and you may require QAC, and it may censor you, but you can have all kinds of security that you use in traditional systems, like circuit breakers, late rate limiters, some kind of behavioral alerts, or anything, several layers of protection, like different groups evaluating the pegging. So you can have a lot of traditional security. So in some cases, having a single authority is, not so bad. Of course, for decentralized assets like Bitcoin, we don't want to have a single party controlling the bridge, right? So what we do is we replace this single authority with a multi-authority. For instance, multi-chain. Multi-chain uses multi-party computation, but essentially it works like a multi-authority bridge. It doesn't matter if they co-sign with a single signature, or they provide different signatures. It's still a multi-authority bridge, right? So in a multi-authority bridge, you need that K out of N parties sign a certain message to be able to transfer funds from the blockchain to another. Obviously, it's more secure. It is censorship resistant. I mean, it can be made censorship resistant, and it's more decentralized, and it doesn't have a single point of failure. The thing is that these protocols, in practice, they have mostly failed. Like Wormhole had this attack because it's hard to protect these individual signatories if they are not using additional layers of protection. Okay, so we should do better on this. So how can we do better than this? And we can replace these signatories with hardware security models that are designed to protect the private key. So this gives you a second layer of defense from traditional internet hacks. So this is what Rootstock does, although this is a simplified diagram because Rootstock does some other things too. Um, that we use hardware security models, and also the Liquid network uses different types of hardware security models. So it's more secure, and you can have, as Rootstock has, the consensus enforced by the HSMs, and we will talk more about this later. Um, then we have this is new types of bridges. For instance, the interlay inter-BTC bridge is a collateralized bridge. In the collateralized bridge, we try to rely on this incentive compatibility or rational assumption of the participants. And so we are willing to give custody of, let's say Bitcoins to any set of parties that are willing to act as custodians of the Bitcoins. They are generally called vaults. If they provide a collateral in a secondary token, let's say these are polka dots, okay? And because they are putting so much collateral and at a higher value than the amount of funds they are protecting in the tokens in the first chain they are protecting, then they are not incentivized to steal them, because if they are, this collateral will be slashed, okay? So the good thing is that this is open for participation, like anyone can be a vault. Uh, it seems to be quite decentralized because of this openness nature, but if you take a look at the protocol in detail, then you have to assume that there is an oracle that will provide the rate of the collateral uh, token against the peg token to make sure that there is enough collateral, and then this oracle may not be decentralized. But I would say that the main problem of this design is highly capital inefficient. Like, it's very rare that people are willing to lock billions of dollars to create more than, let's say, you want to create $1 billion industry of these peg tokens in the secondary chain, and then you have to lock more than a billion of value in a different token. So it's very inefficient, and nobody has found a way to make this a real business, like make these people locking billions of dollars make any money, because once any breach kind of stabilizes, right, and there is liquidity in both sides, there's no real incentive to keep moving the tokens around, right? So this is the problem. It might work on the short term because people might want to, you might want to incentivize people to lock tokens, let's say, to reduce the liquidity of those tokens in the market, or the offer of those tokens. But in the long term, it just does not make much sense. And it does not make sense in blockchains where you are competing with a yield, like an interest that it's given by the blockchain itself for staking. Okay, so it's very problematic. And also the security of this protocol depends on the quality of the collateral and the collateralization ratio. So if there's not good liquidity of this collateral, then the whole security is gone. And now we moved into more interesting, I would say, more complex bridges. For instance, the optimistic bridge. The optimistic bridge, and I'm giving a Doge Ethereum bridge as an example, but it's not exactly Doge Ethereum because Doge Ethereum also has some collateral. But let's take this as an example because they coded one of the directions. So essentially, you have a set of parties that they can take information about events that are happening in the main chain and post them to the secondary chain. For instance, one of these events is, okay, certain amount of tokens have been locked and should be transferred to certain amount of wrap tokens should be issued on the secondary chain and transferred to certain party. And they send this information to the secondary blockchain. And from that point, there is a period of that anyone can contest that uh, that uh, that statement and say, okay, so a challenge can come and say, no, this is not the event that happened. In practice, this other event happened and can be completely a different thing. And so there is a game, interactive game, where these two parties, each one presents the evidence. and the smart contract is able to pinpoint to detect which one of these two proofs is the valid one. And it does it by taking the transcripts of the consensus of the consensus of the first chain and trying to find by binary search the point where these two transcripts diverge, where the two parties are in disagreement, and then it just executes that particular instruction to see which of these two parties is lying. Okay, so the contract itself can detect which of these views of the events is the valid one, and then can release the coins and send the wrapped coins to the user. So it's much more decentralized, but it has a problem that is slow. Like you may need, I don't know, 7 days, a month, to make sure that you have enough time for this interactive challenge and response game to be happening. And it has a strong assumption that there won't be any censorship by the block producers of the secondary chain, because if there is censorship, then they can just censor one of the challengers and let any event go, right? So that's the main drawback. And then there is one particular breach, I call it pseudo optimistic, which is the Nobel breach, that does something like similar to the optimistic, but instead of trying to decide on chain which of these two events is the real one, when there is two parties that are presenting different evidence, then basically the protocol is paused and an arbiter is called to decide which one of these events is the right one. And so it's kind of moderately decentralized. It's more decentralized than do not have this, but it can you can pause the attack with certain amount of capital and force these arbiters to enter, which is kind of a denial of service attack. And obviously it requires a set of parties that have the highest trust to be able to arbiter, right? And now this is one of the bridges that I like most is the drive chain bridge. I created a Bitcoin improvement proposal for a drive chain bridge for Bitcoin in 2016. And the idea with the drive chain bridge is that if you have to assume that there will be a third party, that you will need a honest majority for a third party, and probably you think that this third party, the best third party that you can find from the existing parties, are the block producers. And then instead of creating complex protocol, why don't you make this completely simple and explicit? You let the block producers vote on which is the event that is happening on the main chain, right? So each one of the block producers will add a vote and say, okay, I vote for what really happened is event A. The next one will say, no, what I believe that what happened is event B. And so they will keep voting until they agree that the event A or B is what happened in the other blockchain. So it's kind of very simple and very transparent. And what is the protection that this bridge gives? The idea is that instead of having 1 week of voting, you will have 6 months of voting. So any attempt to steal the funds, it's so slow that anyone in the community will be able to see it and to react to it. So the community can do a lot of things. It can hard fork the platform and replace the block producer from for a different set. If in case of a proof of work blockchain, it can change the proof of work function to immediately replace all the miners. So you have this time to react to an attempt to attack. And you also have this MAD security, that mutual assured destruction security. Basically, the idea is that if the block producers are going to try to steal the funds, uh, and they're invested in the platform, they will be the ones that will suffer the most from the devaluation of the token in case there is an ongoing attack. So if there is an attack, probably the token is gonna go down in value, and all the investment, all the tokens that this group have will be less valuable. So they are not incentivized to go that way. And as I said, it's much simpler than any other breach, and probably the consensus breach. It has an explicit honest majority, so you can see who are the ones that are voting. It requires these watchdogs, these community nodes that are constantly checking what the miners or the block producers are doing. And of course, the other downside is that it's very slow. Okay. And now this one is very popular now because there are many rollups on Ethereum that are using this type of breaches, which is the rollup validating breach. And in the case of a breach to a rollup, you can have this synchrony assumption, essentially because the rollup blocks are intermingled inside the main chain blocks. This creates a synchrony between the two blockchains. So essentially, you get that synchrony that the Samyatin theorem require. So when you have this synchrony, you can actually create a fully decentralized bridge. I'm not saying that in particular CK Sync is currently fully decentralized, but potentially any rollup could become fully decentralized. Obviously, it only works when you have this kind of linked consensus, like two blockchains tied together forming a single chain, right? Well, now I'm going to talk about consensus breaches, which are the origin of breaches. Like the Blockstream paper in 2014 proposed a consensus breach, but now the latest breach are being consensus breaches. So we are going back to the roots. So the idea of a consensus breach is that these messages that go from one blockchain to another are actually the set of blocks and transactions or events that happen in these blocks, so that the second blockchain with a smart contract can fully understand the consensus of the first chain and decide for itself what really happened on the first chain. This is done by what is called a light client. So it's a subset of a full node that can only evaluate consensus, generally only certain rules of consensus, maybe not all of them, but enough to make sure that these blocks that are received are correct, and they are created by the block producers, so that the contract can decide by itself which is the event that happens on the first chain. And if you have smart contracts on both sides, you can do this also in the opposite direction, and you get a breach that it only needs some parties to forward information from one blockchain to the other, but anyone can be a forwarder, right? It doesn't put trust assumptions on the forwarder themselves. You basically have moved the trust assumptions to the block producers. So it's fully decentralized, assuming the honest majority of block producers. It's fully capital efficient, but of course, I mean, it doesn't work if block producers can't censor transactions. Okay, and it requires some kind of watchdogs also. So this type of breach was the Blockstream's original breach, and there is a recent paper called ZK Breach: Trustless Cross-Chain Breach Made Practical, which also proposed and they implemented uh, um, a consensus breach. One of the examples of an existing consensus breach in the production is the IBC, the Inter-Blockchain Communication Protocol of Polkadot. Is that? Yeah, I think so. Okay, no, sorry, the Cosmos. I always mistake Cosmos for Polkadot. Sorry. Okay, so this Cosmos breach. And if you take a look at the paper on Cosmos breach, you find that the breaches to connect to blockchains with the consensus breaches, it requires finality on both chains, like there cannot be reorgs. And you need a cheaply verifiable consensus transcript, which means a light client. Okay, so these are restrictions that you have on the chains that are being connected with a consensus bridge. So let's take a look at the history of light clients, because this is the key part of consensus bridge. So the first idea of a light client is in Bitcoin paper itself, is the SPB proof, which allows you to give us only the headers of the blocks and use those headers to prove that there is a certain best chain, and then you can prove that a certain transaction happened on the best chain. Then you had a Bitcoin J client, which was the first client to use the light client mode. In 2016, the BTC relay was implemented in Ethereum, was the first light client run in consensus on another chain, so it could understand the Bitcoin headers. There was this paper about non-interactive proof of work that allows you to in logarithm space prove that there is enough proof of work in a certain fork on a certain chain, so it allows you to send a lot less information to the light client. Of course, Rootstock, that was launched in 2018, uses Bitcoin Shade. It has an embedded Bitcoin node running in light client mode. Then we had a paper about Flight Client, which is also a way to pack and compress a lot of headers and proof of work into something smaller, logarithmically smaller. Then Zcash implemented Flight Client in 2020. So Zcash can be you can have for instance, a mobile Zcash wallet that syncs very fast using Light Client. And very recently, there's a project called ZeroSync that uses Starks um, to understand, to parse to the Bitcoin consensus. Okay, so very interesting development of proof of work like clients. And you have the same history of evolution in proof of stake like clients. So first, obviously, the creation of BLS signatures, which allows you to aggregate multiple signatures in a succinct signature, so that you can have a committee of thousands of parties, and basically with a single signature you are able to prove that all of them, or majority of them, for instance, voted or accepted something. Then you can have this idea that was first mentioned in forums, that you can make one committee of proof of work, proof of stake stakers, to delegate to the next committee by signing a message with a multi signature. So then you can very fast jumps into committees and make sure that the last committee is the right one, or the right one, by using these committees multi signatures. And there were other developments, like a way to compress headers using snarks in a paper called Plumo. Algorand used something called compact certificates of collective knowledge, also to pack in a small succinct signature a lot of information regarding the signatures of the stakers. We have Mithril, and Algorand recently implemented state proofs, which are basically the building block to create decentralized consensus bridges. And in Ethereum, once Ethereum switched to proof of stake, new light clients immediately appear, showing how easy it is to create light clients for proof of stake uh, blockchains in general. But the question is, why not all bridges in existence are consensus bridges? Because clearly there is a lot of benefits. Well, there are some important obstacles. First is that this theoretical impossibility result is not eliminated, right? So you still need to trust the block producers. And if you don't trust the block producers, then the consensus bridge is not better than any other bridge. I think that the most important reason is that light clients are not replicable. Like, if you want to create a multi-chain bridge, and then you want to upgrade to use a new chain, and this chain uses a different consensus protocol, then you basically have to write from zero a light client for each one of the other blockchains that you do support, that may have different smart contract languages, just to understand the consensus of that new chain that you want to add. So it's not very scalable in terms of going multi-chain. Obviously, unless you put something like a node in the middle, being the center of all the interaction, right? But you still have to write this like client for each one of the chains that you want to support. Another problem is very gas inefficient to verify the consensus of a foreign blockchain inside smart contracts. Obviously, there are certain things that can help you, like flight client proofs or snarks or stars, but still it's very expensive. And you can see this paper that I this ZK Bridges paper, where it explains all the tricks that they had to use to be able to compress in a succinct proof uh, the consensus of a different blockchain. It's very good paper. Uh, this is another blocker. Like, with the exception of Bitcoin, all the consensus of the different blockchains have been mutating all the time. Like, there have been upgrades in Ethereum that changed consensus. Vitalik, for instance, is thinking about switching to single slot finality, which is still another change in the consensus. So, um, what's the point of having a consensus breach if you are going to need to have a master key for upgrading your contracts to be able to switch to the new consensus that this blockchain will upgrade to? So this is kind of a limitation. Like, it only makes sense when all the consensus are set in stone, and nothing changes, which is not generally a realistic assumption. For instance, with the change of Ethereum from proof of work to proof of stake, that was always imminent to happen, this disincentivized the creation of consensus bridge, because the best place you could create a consensus bridge was to connect with Ethereum, because most of the issued tokens were there. So, but Ethereum was always almost close to switching to proof of stake. So there was a very low incentive to really build consensus bridges for Ethereum when it was proof of work. Okay. Well, now I'm going to focus on what we designed many years ago for Rootstock and how it evolved. And I think that Rootstock Bridge is a good example of pragmatical security, like making good trade-offs. It's not perfect. We are constantly trying to improve it, but I think it's a good example. So first, some words about what a sidechain is, because Rootstock is a Bitcoin sidechain. So a sidechain is an independent blockchain that can securely transfer tokens internally and from to the parent network without natively supporting a money token different from the parent native token, which means that you don't have a native token. So you need a bridge. There's no way you can create a sidechain without a bridge. So that's why a bridge is so important for a blockchain like Rootstock. So every sidechain needs a bridge. And if we take a look at how this bridge is located in the Bitcoin stack, basically, I mean, you can have Lightning Network, you can have Taro on top of the Lightning Network, you can have rollups on top of Rootstock, or payment channel networks on top of Rootstock. But Rootstock needs a bridge to connect to Bitcoin. That's where the Rootstock bridge lies. Okay, so you can kind of build layers on top of Bitcoin, but if you are building a sidechain, you need a bridge. So a few words about Rootstock. You may already know it. It was the first sidechain launch. It's merge mined with Bitcoin. It's secured by more than 51 of the Bitcoin hash rate. It has this hybrid SPB federated two-way peg, which we call the PO peg. This peg is drive chain ready. Like this is important because sometimes I hear a lot of questions about if there's a competition between drive chain and Rootstock, and Rootstock was designed to eventually become a drive chain, so there's no competition there. So Rootstock is EVM compatible. It has a rich DeFi ecosystem, and the native token is Bitcoin. We call it RBTC, and of course there is no block subsidy. So let's talk a little bit about the Rootstock bridge. So as I told you before, we have this hardware security models that have the custody of the funds on the peg. They have a they run a multi-signature between all of them, but the private keys cannot be extracted from the devices, and the devices follow the consensus of the chain. So basically, the only way to convince the device to sign something is to give the device an SPV proof, a proof with a lot of cumulative proof of work that can only come from the honest chain. So to send assets from, let's say Bitcoin to Rootstock, you basically send the assets to the multisig controlled by the device, and you send it, and someone takes this information and put this information about what happened in Bitcoin, which is the SPV proof, sends this information to a smart contract in the Rootstock blockchain, which is called the bridge contract, and then this bridge contract is able to parse the consensus of RSK in SPV mode and issue the assets. So it needs a lot of cumulative work to be secure. Like we wait 10 hours of cumulative proof of Bitcoin proof of work for peg-ins and more than 36 hours for peg-outs. So it's slow, but we can have a lot of interesting properties like censorship resistance. For instance, the peg-ins are fully decentralized. Anyone can bring the evidence of a peg-in to the bridge contract. We have these HSMs that enforce consensus, and we have this secure firmware in the HSMs, which checks that the proof of work of RSK it's very, very high, the cumulative proof of work, so what to sign payout transactions. And this is what happens in the other direction. Basically, you send your RBTC to a smart contract. The smart contract will inform the HSM devices. The HSM devices will engage in a protocol to co-sign this transaction. And then obviously this transaction is going to be broadcast. So why we chose to use HSMs? Well, we could have chosen several different technologies to secure the private keys. So let's go from the less secure to the most secure. So you can have the keys stored on standard PCs like TBTC did. Then obviously you can move and use security hardened servers using hypervisor, virtualization, installation, sandboxing, any of the existing techniques to make a server more secure. You can do, if you want more secure than that, you can do what Liquid does, which is having a tamper-proof box, which is standard microcontroller, but the whole system is kind of tamper-proof. You could use a security enclave from Intel or from ARM, like the SGX. The problem is that they have all been broken like several times a year. Nobody knows if this technology will keep being secure or will be broken again and again, because general purpose processors are not designed to store secrets. And you can do what RSK does or what the Ledger wallet does, is having a secure element, which basically is a microchip designed for storing secrets and signing transactions. So the properties of the POPEG, which is the Rootstock peg, it has an defense in-depth design. Like there is several layers that protect you, like the HSM, the POPEG node, the smart contract. You have this consensus enforcing HSMs. It is secured by proof of work. It is fully auditable because everything that happens, the smart contract is in charge and it's controlling. So you can see the messages on the blockchain. So you have this coordination process transparency. You have code transparency through firmware attestation. And currently the devices can attest they are running a certain version of the firmware. And it's quite censorship resistant. It could be better, but it's very censorship resistant. And since we are kind of running out of time, I'm not going to go into detail of which of each was these components of the POPEG peg, but I just want to look at the complexity of the POPEG peg in terms of the different components. You have a lot of on-chain components working together in tandem to create peg-ins, peg-outs, and also to allow the change of the federation, the change of the devices, the change of the composition of the POPEC to happen dynamically and to be able to migrate the funds from the old POPEC to a new POPEC. So you have a lot of on-chain components and you have a lot of off-chain components like the relayers, the pegnatory node, the HSMs, etc., etc. Okay, so kind of a complex system, but well, um, we've worked very hard to secure it. So which is the best bridge? Okay, now that we have all this information, can we decide? And this is, I'm going to give my opinion, and this is based on having seen many of the vulnerabilities of bridges and having seen the code of many bridges. I would choose for an ultra secure, slow, federated bridge which has consensus verified by HSMs, coupled with some other very fast bridges with lower security based on swaps or repayments that can give users, the users are pegging in and out small amounts of funds, the very nice UX and fast peg-ins and fast peg-outs. But I would keep the ultra secure bridge very slow and very conservative, and maybe I would restrict that bridge to only to be used for moving large amounts of funds, which currently, for instance, Rootstock does not. In Rootstock, you can use the POPEC to move any amount of funds. And probably if I had to design it again, I would restrict that to higher amount of funds and make it simpler, right? But obviously, we wanted the Rootstock bridge to be fully we wanted the pegging process to be fully decentralized, and for that we wanted to give the users the ability to move funds without any intermediary. So that's why we make it work for any amount, almost any kind of amount of funds. Okay, and I'm reaching the end of my presentation, so I'm just going to give a brief summary of everything we talked. So first of all, the most important, the transferred digital asset, the project digital asset, the wrapped digital asset is never the same as the original asset. There are security assumptions, a lot of security assumptions. So it's very important to understand the difference between wrapped BTC and BTC. Uh, Second, that the safety of a breach is not evident. So you have to know a lot about computer security. It's not enough to have security audits. There are a lot of things that you have to see or review to make sure that the breach is secure. So that's why it would be great if breach are scored in all these different areas. The other thing is that essentially the issuer of the wrapped asset is the one establishing the baseline security. So anything that you build on top of the asset, it cannot be more secure than what the security precautions the user has established for the wrapped asset. You can build swap and repayment protocols on top of a secure two-way peg. We've talked that the most decentralized bridge that exists is the consensus validation bridge, although it's the most complicated one. And we've seen that the consensus bridge is not very scalable. If you want to make some kind of business of creating multi-chain bridges, then if you do consensus bridges, it's going to be much, much harder. And the last thing that I told you already is that you have to be very pragmatic when choosing a bridge. It's not about theory. It's a lot about how these things are uh, operated in practice, right? Okay, so that's everything I wanted to say. Muchas gracias. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you, Sergio. It was a really great talk. So let's move to the question and answer section. There was a question from JK. He's asking if is RBTC a wrapped BTC like WBTC, or is it a parallel asset of BTC?
Well, I don't know what a parallel asset, but what you mean by a parallel asset, but it's a wrapped it's not the same as Bitcoin, but the security it provides, I think it's much stronger than RAB BTC in Ethereum. RAB BTC in Ethereum is a federated setup controlled by, I think it's 2 of 3 parties that have to sign. And even if that BitGo is involved and BitGo has a very good tradition of security, it's still very few parties. So if the government wanted to, take control of this breach or censor this breach, it would be very easy for them to do it. In contrast, the Rootstock breach, it has a lot more parties participating. I think it's 11 right now. And the pegging process can be fully decentralized, for instance, without any kind of censorship.
Great. You're welcome, JK. There is another question from Tatiana. He's asking, what are the next improvements planned to the RSK bridge?
Oh, we have a long list. We've never stopped working with the HSM team and the POPEC team, thinking about how to improve the security. I think that one of the improvements that I like most is the pre-announcements of the firmware upgrades. So currently, if we want to upgrade the HSM devices, there needs to be a multi-signature. There is a multi-signature. I think it's 2 out of 3 signatories that must approve an upgrade of the firmware. And I think that it would be good for the community to be able to detect in advance any attempt for any notary to upgrade their HSM devices, even if this is required for maintenance or for whatever reason. So one of the improvements would be that the devices would only upgrade to firmware whose hash, which hash has been pre-announced in the blockchain. So the device would check if the firmware upgrade has been pre-announced, like said, with 1 month of in advance, for instance. And I think that would improve the security of, for instance, of the firmware upgrades. But we have a long list of improvements. Currently, we have some improvements to make payouts cheaper, for instance, to switching from the current scripts, which are not using SegWit, to SegWit or Taproot-based scripts, which makes the payout transaction cheaper. These are the ones that I have on the top of my head, but there are many others improvements.
Perfect. Thanks for your question, Tatiana. There is a new one from Eden. When CK rollouts on Rootstock?
Well, you can ask that for the teams that are already for a long time working on rollups on Rootstock. The Reef team has, I think, it has already deployed a rollup on the Rootstock testnet, and I don't know if someone in the chat is from that team and can say something about that. But I think I hope we will see this in mainnet soon.
Perfect. There is a new one from Victor. He's asking, what are the most hardware secure elements do you know? He says, most chip manufacturers say they don't prevent glitching the devices. For instance, injecting voltage spike to produce malfunction.
Yeah. So the secure elements are essentially protected from that kind of attacks. That's what characterizes a secure element. It should be protected from electromagnetic side channels, timing side channels, voltage glitches. Sometimes they run 2 processors in lockstep to make sure that the result of both processors are the same at every step, and they abort if one of the 2 processors produces a different result. So they generally, when you glitch, you generate different effects on the different processors. So a good secure element should be protected from all these side channel attacks.
Excellent. Okay, no more questions so far. So I think we can wrap up here. Thank you very much, Sergio, for your talk. It was a really great talk, and we are glad to have you here again.
Thanks, Julian. Very glad to be here. Yes. Lovely.
Okay. Thank you very much to everyone. See you in the next scientific moment.